Alright, with the release of Final Fantasy XVI behind us and the release of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth on the horizon, there's been a lot of questions being asked about the future of Final Fantasy. What's going to happen with it? What's the next iteration going to be? But most importantly, who is going to lead this franchise going into the future? Will it be Yoshi P in CBU3, or will it be somebody new? And thanks to a recent interview by Nerd Bunker, we might actually have some answers on what exactly is going to happen with Final Fantasy XVII. If any of that sounds cool to you, feel free to click the like button, and if you want to stick around for more content, whether it be Final Fantasy, Resident Evil, or general gaming news, you can hit the subscribe button as well. It's always appreciated. So this interview comes to us from Nerd Bunker. However, we're going to be pulling transcripts from Kalaya Gamer on Twitter. She posted some of the snippets of the interview and some of the translations herself, but the gist of this post is that Yoshi P and Michael Christopher Koji Fox are being asked about their future with the Final Fantasy series and what's next for them. And they talk about the PC port of Final Fantasy XVI, which they're working on, the DLC for 16, and of course their continued work on Final Fantasy XIV, which has been a pretty massive success. But they're also teasing their next project. They don't say what it is by name or what it's going to be, but that they're planning it. And that's got a lot of people questioning, could it be Final Fantasy XVII? Short answer, I don't think it is, and this was actually answered by Yoshi P himself about 8 months ago in a Chinese interview with the outlet Bilibili, or Bilibili, I'm not quite sure on the pronunciation of the outlet. But in that interview, Yoshi P was asked about his future with the Final Fantasy franchise, and does he still see himself being a director after 16 comes out. Yoshi P goes on to say, first of all, at least Final Fantasy XIV is a work that I will remain involved in for the rest of my life, so I will be involved in it before I officially retire, and even after I retire. As for your question of whether I will participate in the development of a Final Fantasy XVII or even Final Fantasy XVIII, I think it's almost enough. I think it's almost time to do some other games. If you always do the same series of works, you'll get the same expectations every time. And developing a Final Fantasy work is far more painful and difficult than people think. For example, personally, I would prefer to leave the plot completely aside and challenge the experience of exploring the open world to the fullest. But after proposing this idea, it's met with the rebuttal, how can you ignore the plot? This time too, when I said I wanted to do real-time combat, I was accused of saying how Final Fantasy without turn-based command system could be considered Final Fantasy. I have been in the development of Final Fantasy for many years, and I always want to challenge new things with more new friends. Of course, that's what I'm thinking at this moment, and no one can say for sure what the future holds. Now, granted, these comments were made about 8 months ago, so Yoshi P could have completely changed how he felt. But for me personally, I don't want Yoshi P and CBU3 to be the new shepherds, so to speak, of the Final Fantasy franchise. And after playing a game like Final Fantasy XVI, and the more I sat with it, the more I thought about it, the more I realized I didn't really like the game. And I had a lot of issues with it, from the terrible pacing of the story, the horrendous pacing of the side quests. I didn't really connect with all of the characters, although I thought the voice actors were phenomenal. I think the voice actors tended to do a lot of the heavy lifting when it came to the character development side of things. Combat against bosses and some of the staggerable enemies was fun, but by the end of the game, it did start to feel very repetitive. And at the end of the day, I think I just realized that the style of game that Yoshi P and CBU3 make just is not for me. And even back to the reveal of Final Fantasy XVI at State of Play many years ago, I remember watching that trailer and it ended and the logo for 16 popped up, and I thought to myself, I feel nothing. I feel no negativity, I feel no positivity and excitement, I just felt in the middle about 16, and I struggled to kind of connect with the game up until its release. And while I do think there are, again, some positive aspects, overall, it's just not a game for me. Now, what I will say is if you're someone who played 16 and you fell in love with it, I genuinely think that is awesome. Whenever you find a new game that you just click with on every level, whether it's gameplay, the characters, the music, the setting, that's a really awesome special feeling that's super hard to capture in this day and age of gaming. And if 16 is something that leads you to become a big fan of Final Fantasy as a whole, I think that's a wonderful thing. It's just not for me personally. Now, I'm not calling Yoshi P a liar, because he seems to be a pretty genuine and truthful person, and because making video games is not easy. But I do kind of question to a degree what Yoshida said about the hardships of making a Final Fantasy game, because I followed the development of this game very closely. And based on what Yoshi P and a lot of the dev team said, it kind of seemed like they were given free reign to make the game they wanted. Of course, it is a Final Fantasy game and there are some restrictions, but seemingly they made what they wanted to make and they put it out there and they took a chance on something different. It worked for some people, it didn't work for a lot of other people. Speaking on someone who I think would be the perfect leader going forward to shepherd the Final Fantasy franchise into the future, it's Naoki Hamaguchi, the lead director of Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Now look, I haven't played Rebirth, most of us probably haven't, but based on seeing what he's done so far with his team on Rebirth, all of the things that they're adding to this game, from gameplay stuff to combat to minigames, world exploration, really focusing on the character bonds in the story and in the gameplay, it has me super excited to see what he's going to do with Rebirth, and I'm pretty sure if Rebirth comes out and it does well, he's probably going to be the lead director on Part 3 as well. And this is someone who started off as a very big fan of Final Fantasy, and he then became a developer, so he clearly understands not just Final Fantasy VII, but Final Fantasy as a whole. And speaking on those hardships that Yoshi P brought up, I don't think Hamaguchi is struggling with any of that, and I would argue that Hamaguchi probably has way more restrictions on his game than Yoshi P did, because he's making a Final Fantasy VII game. When you make a Final Fantasy game, there are tons of expectations there, but when you do Final Fantasy VII, I feel like the expectations are even higher, and I think the restrictions are probably even higher. But based on what we've seen so far in the preview footage and the interviews he's done, he's not struggling with that. He has found a way to keep the identity of Final Fantasy and Final Fantasy VII while also injecting modern gaming sensibilities and some of his own personal favorite things about open world gaming in this day and age. You know, he's a huge Horizon fan, and I see certain aspects of Horizon in Rebirth. He also clearly seems to understand the balancing act that takes place when you're trying to figure out your tone for your game, balancing between light and dark, as well as the overall pacing of your story. I feel like that's something that he's been really eager to talk to people about. And he seems like the perfect person moving forward to become the shepherd of the Final Fantasy franchise, because he really, I think, more than Yoshi P and CPU3, understand what it's going to take to move Final Fantasy into the future, to keep it fresh and fun and exciting and pull in new people. And granted, if he does end up being the director of Part 3, that's going to take up a lot of his time, and Square likes to start development cycles for these Final Fantasy games pretty early on, so there is a likelihood that he would just be too busy to tackle a Final Fantasy 17. Moving past that, I personally would really love to see Hamaguchi-san take over for the franchise moving forward, because I feel very comfortable with what he's showing us and what he's expressing with Final Fantasy, and I think it's pretty clear that he understands what this franchise needs moving forward to become successful again and be in that upper echelon of gaming with the God of Wars, the Spider-Mans, the big epic games, the Elden Rings that come out and people just go nuts for. So with that being said, that is the video. Let me know in the comments down below. Overall, how did you guys feel about Final Fantasy 16? What do you think about Yoshi P's comments? And what do you guys think about Naoki Hamaguchi? Would you feel comfortable with him moving forward as being the shepherd of the Final Fantasy franchise? I am Curious Corduroy. I will see you guys in the next video. Please remember to always be excellent to one another.